Today we will be going over AWS Startups. So let me share my screen and then we can get started. All right, so welcome back to Startups. So to start off, we're going to be discussing developing an idea. So a founder's first goal is to create a product that solves a conflict for customers, and founders should essentially ask the following 5 questions when coming up with an idea. So who is the product for? Why is the product needed? What problem does it solve? Is this important enough? And is there an actual need from this product? And a quote from a famous Silicon Valley entrepreneur, Steve Blank, is more startups fail from a lack of customers than a failure of product development. So it's important to make sure that you have the right product which could actually be of use. Finding a co-founder. So a fun fact is that the most successful startups have proven to have a founder and a co-founder. However, despite this, most of the failures in startups are because of conflicts between the two founders. And because of this, it's important to be truthful about your strengths and weaknesses in order to find a co-founder that complements your skills. So there are a few tips for hiring. The first one is do not give everyone a high title. Do not follow major companies' recruiting techniques. Hire those who have faith in your company and have trial periods for your potential employees. Understanding equity and compensation models. So don't leave anything out of the discussion when it comes to equity distributions among co-founders, because it's important for everybody to be on the same page. The unequal split of equity or profit can eventually lead to distrust, and giving an even share to each co-founder helps the company come first. Also, make sure to have the equity discussion early so that lawyers and shareholders won't need to be involved in the future. Okay, debunking myths. So these are some myths about just generally starting a startup. So the first one is that renting an office is absolutely needed when starting off, and this is obviously false. You don't need an office. You can work in a garage, library, coffee shop, or even a spare bedroom. And if a formal work setting is actually required, one can visit AWS lofts to be in the proximity of technical experts. Um, you have to keep an eye on monthly expenses such as rent and payroll. You have to measure the rate at which profit grows. You have to measure the cost of acquiring new customers. And you also have to make sure that you follow set timetables in order to keep on pace with the goals that you might have. Customer discovery. So you should validate your idea by discussing your product with the people you know, and this could be friends, family, and even potential customers. Discovery is evaluating, correcting, and refining your idea, and this requires a repetitive cycle, which is building, learning, testing, and evaluating. The more customer feedback that you get, the greater advantage you have. And it's also to give customers what they crave, because that will make the market bigger and make customers actually want to buy your product if they really want it. And this is a video, as we've discussed in all of the previous live streams. The videos which are at these points are going to be included at the description of the slideshow after the live stream has ended. All right, moving on to section 2, we're starting off with how to find and listen to customers. So interviews with customers are ultimately the best way that you can receive feedback. And this is going to help you figure out what actually matters to them. Every idea starts with finding a new way to please these customers, and the goal is to constantly update and keep up with their needs. You want to determine whether your services are going to be used by consumers or other businesses. And there are a few tips here for actually communicating with the customers that you may have. So you want to stay away from vague inquiries and avoid yes or no questions. You want to inquire fundamental questions which are designed to evince insight. And you want to understand that general open ended questions are more beneficial. Also, you would like to make sure that you end conversations by actually asking the customer who else to talk to. So it's a repetitive cycle of just gathering the information that could be helpful to you. All right, customer validation and understanding your market. So, customer validation itself is finding and comprehending your customer's specific market. And it's important to notice that enthusiasm doesn't necessarily mean that you have large market. But in order to find out how large the market actually is, you can ask these 5 questions. Is it large enough to support your business? How many people will buy your product? Is it a new or already existing market? You can check the CTR rate, and you can also create a sign-up page for your product's launch. Also, consider how much money it's going to take for you to reach your markets. And understand that software-only products cost much less compared to hardware-only costs. Also, consider implementation roadblocks, such as following certain rules for the specific industry that you might be involved in. Know the competition and also learn from their mistakes to help set you apart. Building a prototype. So, a prototype is something that's created in order to see whether or not a certain product is going to succeed after launch. You want to focus on learning about your product rather than coding and adding to it. A prototype has to be added in order to make the product best suited for customers' needs. Don't hurry the process of making a product's prototype, and also check frequently, excuse me, to make sure the prototype actually follows your goal and that you didn't get sidetracked. So now, introducing the concept of an MVP. So a minimal viable product is typically the first product that a company makes. It's thought of as the simplest edition of a product that still proves a hypothesis. It has as little features as possible that are actually required to support the key function. And an MVP is the first product to be generally ready for the consumer market. It tests a hypothesis and it's like a blueprint because it's a bare bones structure of what the idea was meant to be. Just like a prototype, an MVP is not going to be ideal. And it's important to notice that when you're making your MVP, try to prioritize functionality over aesthetics because aesthetics is more of a final thing that you will work on. So, how to develop an MVP? Building an MVP has multiple repetitive cycles, and it goes through 4 processes like designing, building, deploying, and measuring. With each addition of new processes, the MVP becomes steadily better, and it allows for quick and responsive feedback from users. And just like the previous slide said, it's important to keep the MVP simple. A quote from Reid Hoffman, who's an internet entrepreneur, says, "If you aren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, you ship too late." Also, add features after your hypothesis has been verified so it's not a waste of time. And another video, which is going to be in the description of the live stream once it has ended. And this one's on what is an MVP in more detail. Okay, section 3 starts off with talking about sprints. So, a sprint is a process that is often used when developing software, and it's a certain amount of time where predetermined work is completed. It has a fixed theme and objective, and it also has a deliverable function. It should also last from 1 to 2 weeks. However, the shorter it is, the better, because your goals won't change. And also save customer feedback for the next sprint, and prioritize the focus on primary business functions. Also, you want to focus on high effect and quick to build work. A Quote from Nikki Stone, who's a senior software developer at AWS, is, "You have the capacity to build one great product. Make sure it's the right one." The recommendations after sprints are continuous implementation and constant delivery. So these are some potential pitfalls that you might be facing throughout your journey. An anti-pattern is a universal response to a conflict which is unproductive. And being prepared for an anti-pattern is going to help prevent whenever they undoubtedly show up. Technical debt gathers when engineers rush through work instead of focusing on both quality and proper implementation. And technical debt doesn't necessarily come from laziness, but instead a strategic decision to swiftly eradicate a conflict. Not generalizing code can lead to extra coding work and refactoring, and in total, it's just undifferentiated heavy lifting. Customers want the product, and because of that, they don't mind you borrowing from existing resources. So these are some more fundamentals of working with AWS. So we're starting off talking about one-door decisions and two-door decisions. So one-door decision and two-door decisions don't happen equally, and two-door decisions are the most common, and they also occur the majority of the time. One-door decisions should be thought through thoroughly, and security decisions are one-door decisions because they can't be remade. So when making security decisions, one has to consider both their and AWS's responsibilities. They have to consider who gets access to certain objects amongst the workforce and how much access do the users actually receive. Um, Startups on AWS receive enterprise level security, and AWS itself offers SSL and DDoS protection. It's important to note that SSL stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and standard security technology for creating a protected link between a web server and a browser is this one. DDoS, on the other hand, stands for the Distributed Denial of Service, and this is a cyber attack that interferes with the services of the host, and startups must know the relation of the product with the government, healthcare, and more. They also have to follow any rules and regulations that the field may bring. Points of integration also have to be considered because developers won't be able to understand a product without the appropriate and proper documentation. An API is an application programming interface, and it's a set of guidelines to connect with another person's software. It's very important to select the correct database for the type of data that you specifically need to store. So now an introduction to data architecture with AWS. A monolithic architecture is an architecture that combines all the working parts of an application, like data input, output, processing, air handling, and much more, all together into one singular program. It allows for the rapid development because you don't need to make the processes ahead of time. A well-designed monolith can be scaled horizontally and then broken apart at a later date. Architecture applications like Amazon Elastic Beanstalk will automate all processes for you, and it's much simpler to both work and handle. Microservices are their own independent services that each perform their own functions. They work together as a single product, but if one goes down, the others are unaffected. These are usually good for scaling large systems, but they usually also take longer to build. You want to optimize the data architecture for speed. Serverless is a type of architecture where servers that code is running on don't need to be actually set up by the user. They're automatic scales and they're automatic scales for the user, um, and it basically stops them from having to predict the customer traffic that they might face. Now we're talking about legal needs. So, a common legal decision that a business makes is whether or not it becomes a legal identity. And a legal identity is when a company gains legal rights and obligations like tax filings. There are multiple types of legal entities, like limited liability and unincorporated entities. So, limited liability. In this entity, the detachment of personal resources from business records is present, and it prevents the business's owner's responsibilities in both the loss and legal ability. It exists to help business owners take risks without the fear of legal action and liability. But it's not perfect, and it's also not a get out of jail free card. On the other hand, unincorporated entities are businesses that do not have a limited liability. There are two types: sole proprietorship and general partnerships. Sole proprietorship is owned by the business and managed by one person, and on the other hand, a general partnership has numerous owners and splits up the responsibilities amongst these owners. There's no actual legal difference between the owner and the business itself. Sole proprietorship is cheaper, but it comes with less overhead, and it also risks the owner's personal resources. Another video. And now we're on section 4, which starts off with finding a lawyer. So an option for businesses that are a legal entity is to converse with large startup firms. And these type of firms don't make business owners pay up front, but they instead take a percentage of the company. If businesses do not want to work with large law firms, they can work with startup friendly firms like Atrium. Atrium is a corporate law firm that uses the machine learning software in order to automate legal processes. Another option to find counsel in is colleague and recommendation. So NDAs, IPs, and other legal considerations. So an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement, and it's an agreement that prevents the unauthorized disclosure of secrets. If one's assigning development work to an outside organization, then that organization has to sign an NDA. A venture capitalist provides startups with funds, but likely receives a return investment. A venture capitalist organization is mostly not going to sign an NDA. A founders agreement is a necessary legal step when there are multiple founders involved. So founders involved can outline the responsibilities of each founder who actually is involved. It can be hard to publicate though, and there's no template to use as a reference. It's also often numerous negotiations, and it can be very time consuming to go through and finish. What is the intellectually property or the IP protection? So this is the other type. And it's a type of legal concept that provides legal protection and assets. The trademark is a type of IP protection which shields when the product of a company are being copied. And patents guard the organization's product, and it gives the patent owner the right to prevent others from using, creating, or selling their patented product. Patents usually last several years, and copyright is the guarding of original artistic worth, or for most startups, it's just the primary IP protection. Introduction to fundraising. So, fundraising is important because it's a full time job and should be taken very seriously. Venture capital firms invest in companies that they believe in and hope that they get a larger return. So pre-seed and seed and Series A and Series B. So pre-seed and seed is an investment that occurs even on before the company shows that the product will work. Um, even before the company shows that it's going to work. For Series A and Series B, this is funding that is used to help continue to scale the business, and the pressure to deliver when a VC invest can be high. But it's likely that even a business with this support will be out of business in only a few years. Some VCs also work in pre-seed or seed functioning, and pre-seed funding typically occurs in the early stages of product development. Pre-seed investments range from $50,000 to $250,000, while seed investments range from $250 to $1 million. When funding the VC, it also adds another person to add up to. But there are sources that are present outside of the VCs. Some of them include, excuse me, angel investors, non-dilutive funding, crowdfunding, and accelerator programs. So for angel investors, these are wealthy people who are looking to passively fund startups with capital in exchange for equity and convertible debt. They don't expect or want a 50 times return on the investment, but instead have a different motivation. They usually invest about $25,000 to $250,000, and for some angel investors, a 3 to 5 times return would be amazing. Non-dilutive funding is the money that is incorporated in order to support the product without having to give up any equity. Examples of this include the bank loans or the university, uh, or federal grants. Crowdfunding is basically GoFundMe and Kickstarter, and it may assist in providing early adopters, but it may be also more difficult than seed rounds. Um, Group-based programs where entrepreneurs produce their ideas into reality, select a tiny percentage of companies, and help make those specific companies. There's usually an investment of 20 to $150,000, and they ask for 5 to 7 equity return investment. They offer mentoring, training, and feedback, and they usually only last 3 months though. So crafting a fundraising narrative. A fundraising narrative shows why one is spending money in the first place. But it's not the same as a pitch deck because it's much less specific and thorough. Although this is true, the primary questions still have to be answered, like what are you creating, what's the most captivating factor of it, how much progress has been made, and what are you striving to achieve. The narrative should be short and sweet and have the ability to discuss it with 20 potential investors. Also, it should be quick so that it can be explained in 20 seconds or less. The first 10 should be who are you, what are you doing, and why is it important, and then the last 10 should be progress milestones and long-term vision. Try to find one persuasive reason as to why your company should receive investment, and a good narrative should have a strong financial plan to support this. Financial models are essentially inferences in these situations. Another video. And finally, the last section, starting off with what makes a good pitch deck. So the pitch deck is basically your entire business card, and it's given to those who are in the best position to help you, like investors and mentors. One of the first things companies are going to see, and excuse me, and one of the first things that is going to leave a huge impression about your company is the pitch deck. The key areas include the problem and solutions, the business model, and the market. Creating a deck, you want to start with whatever is the most persuasive, keep it incisive, and it's better to be concise than to make investors disinterested. It's typically a length of 10 to 13 slides long, and you want to make sure your deck answers the whys behind the investments. Like, why is this a good opportunity? Why is this the proper team to do it? And why is this round of funding necessary? How to prospect your initial fundraising funnel. Generate contention among investors. The 3 to 1 rule is important in order to generate this competition. Be in the final stages of negotiations with 3 interviewers at the same time. And it's estimated that you need about 10 meetings between investors in order to create a 3 to 1 situation. Some investor companies invest in numerous companies while others only invest in a limited amount. Tools like Crunchbase and LinkedIn can help find investors if you can't find 20 or more to start with. Other entrepreneurs have VC companies that work with them, making it easy to get advice and how to approach them. Try to focus on people in the VC business and people who aren't just and not people who are just firms. Initiating fundraising mode. Spend approximately 10% of the time creating relationships with potential investors and founders later on in the process. Relationships can make it easy and quick to find high-level investments. Also, negotiate and finalize with an investor before moving on and searching for a new group. Make sure that you understand the different types of people working at a VC firm, like partners, venture partners, principals, and associates. Partners are the people who generally make the most decisions. Venture partners are part-time workers and look to source deals and make a couple investments. Principals are new to the business and are just starting to make deals, and associates can now make investments, but business owners navigate them through the investment process. Attempt to also have a mutual acquaintance that introduces you to the actual investor. Understanding the stage of growth. So there are 2 stages. Number 1 is deliver a product. Can your team build something consumers will buy? Is the product really ready to be sold on the product after their first sale? Can one must ask themselves if they can turn their customers into a full customer base. And the objective here is to obtain a large amount of sales. Stage 2 is expansion. So survival is basically guaranteed at this point, and investors are guiding business to further success. The startup is a more mature business, and it's no longer just considered a beginner or a startup. Well, no, it's still a startup. And you must do your homework before reaching stage 2, where survival is guaranteed. How to build a product roadmap. So a product roadmap is a guide through the whole business process from making a product to making your first sale. Creating milestones throughout the map in order to help shareholders know where key important events are in a basic timeline is important. A/B testing helps set apart 2 options when coming across how a certain variable must function. A/B test brings about valuable results about which option will perform the best based on a particular parameter or goal. It helps make the decisions less biased, and it's an important decision when making a roadmap, along with deciding when to pivot. If your product development team starts heading in the wrong direction, a pivot on your roadmap can help things get back on track if something isn't working. Don't force it and cause more trouble. Instagram pivoted their idea from being a check-in product to a place to post personal pictures to show the world. Then they stripped off any non-essential features in order to both save money and benefit the app. And finally, product/channel fit. How effective is the product at having consumers actually find it effectively and publicly? See, these are some common startup growing pains, so they can cause long hours and be extremely demanding. And there are ways to conduct business with greater results for your employees and your own product as well. Create and enforce limits on work hours. Throwing all the energy into a setup is going to hurt the product and its effectiveness. Generate nourishment codes for all employees, so a finish line. Pay a great amount of attention to the hiring process, and employ people that fit your company culture. Interviewing is also critical, and it's important to consider if a candidate will contribute and just not be a non-negative. A gut interview question would be to ask how the candidate worked through a real-life problem. And at a startup with less than 100 employees, the CEO themselves should be making the hiring decisions. Culture. Culture is the persona of the company. It's a mixture of the following: the work environment, company mission, values, ethics, expectations, and goals. Think about having third party voices, giving a voice into the culture of the company, because this might be a possible benefit. Make a culture that accommodates not just yours, but the company's strengths and weaknesses. However, it's important to know that culture isn't equal to perks. It's way more difficult to generate. Find different ways to talk to employees en masse, and understand that information is received differently by different people, mentally speaking. Multiple pass-throughs are going to have to be used in order to spread the necessary information. And a founder should personally interview at least 50 to 100 people for the first hires. Develop effective interview questions, and defining culture is not the end. So on this slide, it says 50 people for the first hires, um, and the last slide, it says 100. Um, Obviously, it depends on the type of startup and everything that kind of goes along with that. But it would be good to have at least 50 to 100 people being hired by the founder themselves in the beginning. And that's the bibliography. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next.